So, last session of the day today, I think thus far it's been really good discussions. We got started a little bit broad, became a bit specific to talk about HIE, and then I thought it's going to be a good idea to close the loop by talking more in generalities and a bit broad. So for this session, I'm really honored to have an exceptionally distinguished group of panelists from EMA, FDA, PMDA, and NCCHD Japan. We have Ralph Bax, Susan McCune, Colin Huenge, Dr. Hide Nakamura, Lin Yao, Diana Green, and finally Michio Sakiyama. Uh, the topic of this discussion is to really, even though it says pediatric, my main focus, honestly speaking, is about neonatal drug development with a regulatory focus, asking people about their perspectives with a regulatory hat on to the extent it's possible about what exactly are the challenges in neonatal drug development, because I think you all know uh, I've been using this term for quite a while, that neonates are therapeutic orphans. I don't think I have to tell you, up to 90% of drugs in NICU used off-label, which causes a whole set of problems. It reduces further incentives to develop drugs specifically for neonates. It's just basically a kind of a vicious cycle that goes on and on and on and on, right? I really wanted to talk to this group of panelists, asking with their from their perspective. While there are frameworks in at least in the US like BPC and PREA Act that have created good pathways for older children, neonates are largely or mostly left behind. Something is wrong, something is not working. I just wanted to understand what exactly is the issue there, right? So I'm going to get directly into the discussion and open it up, not targeted at any specific person. And maybe this is going to be a question to every single person. What, in their perspective, is wrong with neonatal drug development? Why are still neonates? Very loaded question, right? No, but I think no. Look, I mean, we've been having these discussions day in and day out, every single day, right? So uh, that doesn't mean that everybody has to like talk like in an essay format about what's wrong. Maybe one thing that they think is the most important challenge in neonatal drug development. That's what I'm gonna open up this panel to. And same question to everybody. And maybe Susie, I'll start in the line, in the order I'm seeing people in. So probably start with Susie.
That's
Yeah,
not really very fair.
I know.
Because just so everyone knows, I'm not Mark Turner. Unfortunately, Mark wasn't able to join us today. So I'm Susie McCune sitting in for Mark. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm a neonatologist, spent some time at the FDA, did some work at Clinical Research Organization, and I am now gainfully unemployed on the Tom Brady retirement plan. Uh, so you probably haven't seen the last of me, but I don't know what that next career path is going to be. So I just wanted to say a shout out to Inc. in the 10th year, since I am sitting in and a very poor stand-in for Mark Turner. But Mark, and as John mentioned, Mark, John, and Ron Portman and I were the four people that really worked with Lynn Hudson and Martha Brumfield at the time to really get Inc. going. And what a tremendous journey it's been over the last 10 years to have all of you here and have these discussions. And what started out at very high level and now Kanwaljit is now reminding us that we're getting into the weeds, which actually is a really good thing, because once you're in the weeds, you're really getting things done. Okay, so Kanwaljit, I didn't do any prep. They just asked me to sit here. So what's the problem with neonatal drug development? Is that where we're going? Okay.
That's where we're
All right. So you guys aren't going to get any time to talk because I'm going to take an hour to no. I think that when we started this, and Lynn will talk about BPCA and PREA and extrapolation, which are all things that I think are doing a tremendous job of pediatric development. And early on, I think everyone said, oh, we won't do anything in neonates because BPCA and PREA aren't relevant. And that's not true. I mean, in most of the pediatric review committee meetings, we talked about why can't we do these studies? Do we need to do these studies in neonates? And with the Levitt partners and the Alliance, talking about what's the right age to be able to do studies, if especially in cell and gene therapy, as John has been talking about today, the earlier that we can do this, the Ristoplam in utero example, I think we're going to be talking more and more about doing neonatal studies, especially in the cell and gene therapy arena. You don't wait until they're adolescents. That you may not be able to reverse anything at that point. So just because you're getting safety in an older population isn't helpful, and won't be, and then we won't know what to do if you don't have the efficacy data. So I think we really have to think thoughtfully about what population we're looking at, why we're looking at them, and especially with genetic syndromes where we're going to be doing newborn testing, newborn screening, that we need to think about what the optimal timing of treatment for those patients is. I think that one of the things that we have found is that neonatal disease is very different from every other disease population, whether it's pediatric or adult. And it's because these patients have interrupted a normal process that otherwise is not seen after the neonatal period. So if you are born before you go through the third trimester, think about all of the things that you have to go through in terms of normal development and normal physiology. And then you think about the fact that this is a relatively hypoxic environment, and now you've made them relatively hyperoxic. And what is that doing to all the organ systems? What are you doing when you're not getting adequate calcium levels, when you're not getting adequate IGF levels, where you're not getting, all of the things that you otherwise would get if you were in utero? And I think we have to go back to the science and really think about what are we missing here? What have we interrupted? What normal processes have we interrupted? How have we interrupted them? How have we made them worse? And how do we reverse that trend? And so I think it's really thinking about the neonate, the development of the neonate, the ontogeny of the organ systems, and how we've interrupted that process, either through injury of inflammation or prematurity or whatever it is that is the underlying cause of the problem. Because I think the science will really help us, and then we'll get to developing models that I think is really potentially really interesting. Animal models have been a challenge across the board, and I think that if we can be really creative and think about non-animal model based approaches and really build into those models the ontogeny and the problems associated with neonatology, I think we can build some really spectacular models. So I think that that's a place to move forward. I think that and we've talked about it as well in terms of uh, consistency in care globally, and thinking, I'm a neonatologist. We're all cowboys. We all want to do it our way. We don't want to be told how to manage the ventilator. But I think that if we want to improve the drug development paradigm, we have to think about how to be consistent. We talked about consistent standardized reading. We need to be standardizing the care as much as we can. And how do we then find patients that, in terms of enriching the population so that we're not looking for a needle in a haystack? Because we have to have a win. What you've been hearing at the last session, what you were hearing about, and I was not kidding, Lynn, when I said I was going to take the whole hour. So, what you heard in the last session is it's hard to get investors to pay for the studies because they don't want to take a risk, because we don't have a well-trod regulatory path yet. We need to get some wins. And in order to do that, we're going to have to be very thoughtful about the populations. We're going to have to be very thoughtful about the natural history data that we have, and we're going to have to enrich those populations. They're very painful studies to do because we've got lots of primary, secondary, and exploratory endpoints because we don't know the right answer yet. But I think once we do, and once we are successful in getting a few of the drugs that are currently in trials, I've been talking to a number of the folks today. Once we get over the end line, then I think that things will improve because I think then we'll have a path that we can go down. So all right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lynn.
Yeah. So Lynn, maybe I'll change
Don't
it's the same.
see. I didn't
question.
discuss this with anyone.
Same question. Okay, just I'm phrasing it a little bit differently. Susie talked a lot about the question I asked was the problem in neonatal drug development. I think what I wanted to ask from you was if there was one thing somebody could change to improve industry engagement and involvement in neonatal drug development, what would that be? It is one of the questions actually in there.
It is. Well, now I can't say what I was going to say, which is what she said.
It's the same. Okay, please go ahead.
So if I could change one thing.
You can just do things.
Okay, two. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks, Kamal. I don't know if it fits this room. It probably doesn't fit this room. But if I could change one thing for sure, it would be the idea that you can't do it. So let's just find something else to do, right? There's always the idea that there's an opportunity, but I think I heard it many times in different ways from different people. Oh, but if that opportunity cost is too high, let's just look somewhere else, right? If I could change one thing, I think what I would say, and that's the experience that we've had over 25 years of implementation of, these landmark US laws that have clearly changed the landscape for most children who suffer diseases, not all populations, is that it takes brave people to say, I'm not going to accept no for an answer, and I'm going to figure out a way forward. So, I'm looking at people in this room like Susie and John, Ron, bless his soul, others who came before us who said, we're not going to accept no for an answer. So that's maybe my wish. I think what I would say practically is, and this goes back to the beginning of Inc., if you will, 10 years ago. We had nothing going on. And when you keep that statistic in your head about nothing approved since the early 90s, 30 years since we've had a real drug approved for neonates, we could all say, oh my gosh, it's 30 years and throw our hands up in despair. But what I've heard at this meeting today is quite impressive, actually, about what's been done just in the last 10 years to move some things forward. I mean, I'm very impressed, honestly, with the development of the adverse event system for neonates. I mean, that didn't exist until Inc. got involved, or at least it was not formally in existence, right? This idea of normative laboratory studies, that's big. And then the idea that we can have real conversations about a disease that we didn't even know, we couldn't even really well define. And now we're talking about how do you run a clinical trial in HIE, right? Or BPD. I mean, I think these are real, the ball does not advance quickly in drug development. It hasn't on the pediatric side overall, and it certainly hasn't for neonatology. But I do feel like with the energy in this room, and what I've heard over the last few years, is that we're getting to a point where I think people are starting to see that maybe this can be done. And once people start to see that this can be done, I think it will get done. So not so much what I would change, really what I would encourage is that you not quit right now, because I think we're really, I feel it. I felt it certain times. I know in the extrapolation, we talked about I'm sorry, I'm digressing too, but Michio knows. Michio, Diana, Cecile, Susie, myself, Ralph Harold. I mean, there are a lot of us who've been involved with the pediatric extrapolation story. And that took, many, many years. But now people are saying, well, why aren't we doing this? Or why haven't you considered a Bayesian approach? I remember sitting in a meeting, I think it was a DIA meeting, probably around 2015, where someone said, well, how about using a Bayesian approach? And I'm like, Bayesian? You'll never get anybody at FDA to ever agree to that. So again, sometimes you can't, it's hard to measure the progress when it's like one stone at a time until you see that the building's actually starting to be built. So my one thing that I would change is not really to change at all, but just to continue everybody in this room to keep at it.
Can I add?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
I'll piggyback on that and also encourage to keep going, because I'm also so excited and really so impressed this morning and this afternoon from what I've heard. But I'm also excited because we're at a very unique time, I feel, where we're entering into a phase, I think, of scientific advancement that we probably haven't seen, right, in a long time, maybe in a generation, because of our ability for data computing, for AI, for analytics. All of that is coming alongside of all the progress that's been made here from the groundwork that's been laid by Inc. over the last 10 years. So now some of that work and all of that data, we're going to be able to pull it together and integrate it in ways that we have never been able to. So I get excited when I hear about the real world data project and all the data points that are going to be within that project and the data sharing platforms that are coming online that Inc. has been working on, because we're going to be able to leverage that information as we mature around the use of tools like AI and analytics, as we've already matured around the use of disease models, systems pharmacology. All of those things are kind of coming together at the perfect time. The thing we have to do is to make sure we keep all of the folks involved in these spaces in the same room and working in parallel on maturing these processes at the same time. So I would just encourage that Inc. continue to be a coordinator of that critical work. So meaning as we strengthen these other work streams, we're bringing along our data scientists, we're bringing along our pharmacometricians, we're bringing along the folks who are going to become the experts in AI, so that we can make sure to use that data to be able to help this population. Because the challenges aren't going to change. These small groups, these vulnerable populations, the ethical constraints. But what has changed is technology is going to allow us to leverage data sets that we felt we couldn't understand before. And now we're going to be able to understand that data and be able to use it, and hopefully use it more consistently and have some regulatory processes around it, and also be able to provide more regulatory clarity on the expectations. So.
Darren, I just wanted to follow up with a little bit more specific question than the general one that I started with. In your opinion, why haven't legislative initiatives like PREA, BPCA not been quite as effective in this youngest group of population as compared to, I guess, older children?
Yeah. Yeah, that continues to be a challenge and
Yeah.
a thorn in our sides for sure, because the data does bear out that BPCA and PREA are highly effective, but for whatever reason, they haven't been as effective for neonatal product development and spurring it forward, as we've seen for pediatric development overall. We're 20 plus years out now from those legislation. And what we've seen is that, unfortunately, a very low percentage of the trials and indications have involved neonates. And so in my opinion, what I think it tells us is that while we have requirements and we have incentives, there's something about that mix that hasn't really enticed drug developers to take the risk in this space. And we already know that commercially, these programs and these indications may not be financially attractive per se, but are there ways that we can continue to leverage legislative initiatives or efforts to think about how do we make this space, how do we de-risk the space even more for companies to be able to find this space attractive? And that may look like, of course, continuing to educate folks on the variety of tools that are already there, or on the variety of incentives. I'm always surprised sometimes when companies come in and they don't realize the intersection between some of the incentives. Sometimes they think it's one versus the other, where sometimes it can be a complement of incentives that may drive a space. But at the same time, I think we are at a place where, since we are 20 years out, do we need to think about, are there neonatal focused needs that perhaps aren't being captured in our current programs. And we need to think about then how do we fill those needs? And of course, that's a different discussion. I don't want to get into policy and legislation specifically from an FDA perspective, but I do think we have to think about the fact that the current strategies as they exist aren't doing the job to drive things. But I do want to remind people we do have the Orphan Drug Act, and a lot of these products are rare diseases, as this audience knows, but we have to continue to remind folks that that is a pathway that they should be leveraging. We have to remind folks that BPCA has a value. We are listening to industry when they tell us that the financial incentives associated with BPCA in today's market may not be the same as what they were 20 years ago. And so what does that mean? How do we look at that and think about then, how do we address those issues? I think all of that are things that we are, clearly interested in.
Yeah, thank you. Ralph, are you actually online? Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. So, I just wanted to repeat that same question that I asked our FDA colleagues. Would you mind answering this question from like a European and EMA perspective? I guess, what in your opinion is the biggest barrier that continues to hinder and hold back neonatal drug development? I know how passionate you are about that, so I was just wanting to really, ask your perspective as well.
I mean, I would also like to echo a more optimistic approach. So the European legislation covers the whole pediatric population, but apparently it's not an incentive enough for our most difficult and challenging population. I must also add that we are also seeing difficulties in other age groups at the moment. This is not only for neonatology where we are seeing hurdles. Obviously, unfortunately, some aspects haven't changed. It being regarded as too risky development, and also this cautiousness on the regulatory side. I'm speaking about the European landscape, where for sure we need to focus even more on getting across a message where PDCO might be looking into a change of paradigm, saying, okay, we don't need data in adults or older children because the neonatal disease might be a completely different one. But in reality, there still is this cautiousness. In reality, people might still be asking for additional data. So it's not only science, but also to get across changes and new ideas, which is sometimes not easy, not only on the developer side, but also on the regulatory side. When I heard in the last session, we were discussing about MRI at a certain day, or, then I just go back to our discussions at the pediatric committee when developers are asked to include, video EEG monitoring over a long term or over a certain period of time. What do we get as a response? This is not possible. This is not possible in this side, in that country. Carol already has referred to it. So we need also to have a certain pragmatism. And for all this to happen, I also am remaining optimistic that we need to, on one hand, do all this, what is happening now in parallel. But we need to also, at the same time, we can't wait for the outcomes. We can't wait now for how many years until we find 150% alignment or agreement for a certain biomarker or clinical outcome. We need to then, for ongoing developments, I would plead to developers, please come to regulators early. Please come to all major regulators early, because we are on a nearly daily basis witnessing the problem that studies are already ongoing, and then it's really difficult or impossible actually to contribute also from a regulatory and scientific side to an optimal approach, and that causes again delays and so on. So I would please don't fear regulators, come to us, and then we can also have an opportunity to discuss early on amongst us, even if we don't know all the final outcomes, or we even have to fine-tune the neonatal seizure paper according to first experiences we have had, as it is happening now. So overall, I'm optimistic, but I'm also aware of the fact that the pragmatical approach is needed and shouldn't be overlooked. Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. I think I'm going to mix up things just a tiny little bit for you, Colin. You know, so
I was gonna say I agree with them.
you know, yeah, that's not good enough. So I wanted to go a little bit towards. I think Lynn talked about real world data. I think Diana, you also talked about real world data platform, right? One of the biggest challenges, something that I've heard again and again from talking to industry, is how difficult, from their perspective, it is to conduct and enroll and keep engaged the patients in the clinical trial, simply because like it's an acute emergency situation in the NICU all the time, rare condition. You don't necessarily find necessary number of patients you need to conduct a well-powered clinical trial, right? Colin, in your opinion, what do you think is the utility of, I guess, real world data platforms and innovative clinical trial approaches like adaptive clinical trials, external controls, and things like digital twins? Where is it now? Where is it going? So,
Well, I mean, I'll link back some of the concepts and sort of go to your question a little bit in a bit roundabout way. Like, one of the things that I think that neonatology has suffered with in drug development has been a lot of the people in the space come, if they succeed, which is not very many, they banner their success, and then they're done. They're done. For many instances, probably the majority of them, they're trials that either don't get completed or they fail, right? And then there's this lack of institutional memory that gets built, and we all get to build the same bridge over and over and over and over and over. And so, like, one of the things that I think is you've seen probably throughout the day is there's been a large discussions around task force, initiatives. And so I think the idea from this was just to really take a more strategic approach, taking the existing science, identifying gaps, and then helping fulfill those, or to complete the bridge as far as we can, and disseminate that out to the communities. And I think that that's an important element by which these efforts will unfold, because I don't know about you, and as as Betsy noted, having to keep rebuilding the same bridge over and over again is not fair to anyone, right? And I know as a parent, like, you want to be able to build upon the experience, and good or bad, that they had, so that you don't have to reproduce the same thing again. So that leads to data. I think data is a huge source of this. I think, I was excited to hear Jana's comment about exploratory data. The challenge, I think, that I see even with data that exists, it's sometimes the incompleteness or the other, and having really good questions. But like, one of the things I would have said, growing up as a clinician or as an academic, is I wouldn't have understood how to divide the question in a regulatory context. Like, how do I establish surrogacy? What do I need for biomarker? How do I handle missingness? And so I think that, having those structured conversations to work through very methodologically, how to get to those rebuilding and that institutional memory so that it's publicly available with the data that's available, is really where we need to go. And I think it's really important. In some cases, it's going to be a control. In other instances, it's going to be, a Bayesian methodology. In some cases, it's going to be, cooking, an enrichment tool or something like that. But it really builds upon the structure of using data for the clinical questions at hand, the strength of the existing data, and also employing existing methodologies to improve things in analysis, and to instruct both sides, the regulator side and the academic side, to align more effectively on those clinical questions and the gaps and such. So
I guess the follow-up question is, some of these things have existed for quite a while, the ones that I talked about, adaptive trials and external controls and the like. What has been holding it back so that, not, there's still sort of some sort of a hindrance in there. And maybe this is a question for the entire panel, not necessarily just to Colin.
No, 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 I think it's familiarity, right? I mean, we all, like I would said, historically, most of neonatal and natural history study, things that have been done, it's very traditional methodologies, right? It's what we were familiar with. There's a lack of precedence. There's not positive signal to detect it. You were right. So everybody stays comfortable where they're comfortable. And so I do think this is an area that we need to spend a lot of time and attention to, but it's going to be probably a little bit painful because it's going to be us changing our current mantra of thought about how we design trials in neonates. We were talking about a little bit off and break, and, even thinking about how to do a run-in to learn from the trial methodology. Is this even, are we creating so much noise in the trial design that this isn't really going to help us, and then learning to pivot and learn from that trial design methodology. And that's not what we would have never normally talked about. And so it's going to be moving outside of that comfort zone and having those conversations that we need to have to design better trials. But some of those are going to be lots of statistical analysis around type 1, type 2 errors and negotiating those and things. And that's not normally what we normally do.
Yeah, go ahead. Well,
Age before beauty, right? So I think there are a couple of things. There are multiple clinical trial designs, very, innovative types of clinical trial designs, especially for rare diseases and, randomized withdrawal and, all that. They don't work in the neonatal space because the problems that need care are acute problems, the things that we've been talking about today. So some of it is that we're a little bit limited. But the place where I think we should be shining, and I'm not sure we are yet, but I think we will, is that for all of the babies that we have in the NICU, it's a captive audience. And we're capturing data on those babies and in a minute by minute basis. We have all sorts of data. We probably have too much data. And at the end of the day, and when you're trying to compare one NICU to another, you've got different systems, you've got different ways of how do you analyze that data? Do you look at it over, as you get every 10 seconds you're getting data. Do you average it over a minute? Do you average it over 5 minutes? Do you take the lowest value? Do you take the highest value? Take the median value? So I think that sometimes I think we have a little bit too much data. And I think, John, you've been talking about, and Kanwaljit, all of the data that you all have done such a great job of collecting over the, past 5 years or so, that we should now be able to take advantage of understanding those data, just like we talked about today with the lab values. How do we then look at the data to then be able to use those data as external controls or as other controls, or to be able to do modeling and have twins, so I think that we're on the cusp of really being able to do something that other people can't do because we have so much data. We just need to figure out how to process that data.
yeah. Lynn, you had a comment.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this because I feel like maybe I came off as too optimistic or too Pollyanna, because I don't mean to be Pollyanna, because I do understand the real challenges that this room has been collectively facing over the last more than 10 years. But the one thing that I will say is that, and I'm speaking for regulatory authorities here in Asia, in Europe, and I would be happy for them to correct me if I'm wrong. But the idea is not that we are trying to prevent drugs from being approved or therapies from being used. What we're trying to do is establish the evidence base that will make sure that when we dispense that medication, we have confidence that it's going to work and that the risk benefit is reasonable for that particular patient, right? So when you're talking to FDA or when you're talking to EMA or you're talking to PMDA, the questions, maybe you'll hear from us, no, right? But in that no, there's always a but. So it's no, but. So no, but if you try this or do this, or maybe we'll meet again. So always listen to the but, because there's a lot in that but. Even when what you're hearing loud and clear is the no. Okay, that didn't come out right. But anyway, and then the other part is when you hear a yes, it doesn't mean, okay, done, we're not going to do it. It's yes and. So a lot of times you might hear from EMA, yes, and that and may be, you know, what is it going to need to be to establish a global, you know, global alignment. So my point in saying this is that we hope that we've demonstrated to you over the last 10 years that the folks in the regulatory agencies are really committed to trying to figure out solutions. So it's really important that you recognize that we're trying to help. The other last point I want to make, sorry, which is off topic, but you know, in terms of like what I've learned, if I'm thinking about what I've learned the most over the last 10 years, working with stakeholders, working with public-private partnerships, I will say that the voice of the patients and the voice of caregivers in this dynamic has really been transformational to me. Just even what we've heard today from what's meaningful to families is revealing to me, or what's meaningful to a caregiver is very meaningful. So I think one of the things that we have to continue to remember is not only to engage regulatory authorities early, but to engage our patients, our families, our caregivers early in the process too, because they will lead us to the endpoints that we really need to think hard about.
Absolutely, agreed. This is again to Michio and to Hide. Do you guys want to talk about the state of neonatal drug development in Japan? Just let us know where things are, how things are. What are your perspectives on the issues and challenges?
In Japan, the pediatric drug development is not mandated. So not only neonatal drug development, but also pediatric drug development is not enough. And Japan's neonatal care is at a high international standard. However, most of drugs are administered to neonates as off-label use. I am very surprised that even in the US, new drugs has not been approved for neonate for 30 years.
Yeah.
Really?
30 years,
Oh,
yes.
I was very surprised.
Yeah.
So therefore, Japanese neonatologists and the PMDA can discuss with the US and the EU colleagues in same page. And pediatric drug development network has been established within Japan Pediatric Society to promote pediatric drug development. The network covers all age group of pediatrics, including neonates. This network supports drug development through global and local industry-sponsored clinical trials. Once a drug company decides to develop a drug and request this network to support related subspecialty societies under the Japan Pediatric Society will be assigned. The society collaborates with the company to select appropriate clinical trial sites and provide advice and the support from the planning to completing of the clinical trial. The network also support patient enrollment. This network is highly useful, so I would like many companies to take advantage of it. This network is also expected to promote neonatal drug development in Japan. Dr. Nakamura, if you have any additional comments.
Well, actually, I'm in charge of the Japan Pediatric Society Pediatric Drug Development Network. There are two networks in Japan. One is this Japan Pediatric Society Drug Development Network. The other one is Japanese Clinical Trial Network. The second one is one which actually conduct clinical trials, and there, it consists of 51 institutions. The first one is a group of advisors, network of advisors, and give advice in any subspecialties. And among them, like you know, there are many neonatals who've been at this NIC meeting. They are one of the most keen people to conduct global trials, global drug development, as well as neurology. So again, well, it's funny. The recent change in, is that the pharmaceutical affairs law? Pharmaceutical medical device affairs law says it's mandatory for the best effort to plan pediatric clinical trials. So it's like people ask me, is it mandatory or it's effort? Well, I can't answer, but now and that link to premium on drug prices and also as well as data protection. So it will give industry some incentives. And last week, PMD organized a pediatric symposium, and there were more, it's a virtual, and there were more than 1,000 attendants. 20 years ago, when we tried to have a pediatric symposium, very few people. And one of the professors almost threatened industries to have somebody join, and they're like 80. So 20 years later, voluntary attendance of thousands. So Japanese environment is changing rapidly. Although it's not mandatory, we are trying to do the best, and the Japanese neonatologists are really keen on conducting global trials. So, and one thing is there are like neonatologists and neurologists. They're hoping to have conversation on the protocol designing as early as possible, and they, you know, that way we can make the protocol feasible in Japan as well, and hopefully in many Asian countries. So early discussion is also a key.
Right. You know, there's one other thing that I wanted to bring up for discussion, and that was basically what can be done to make the harmonization efforts, and that's probably going to be relevant for FDA, EMA, and PMDA. Current regulatory harmonization efforts a little bit more effective and efficient compared to the current state of affairs. Not saying that there aren't any harmonization activities that go on, like cluster call initiative, which I'm aware of. I think Lynn, like I was discussing with you the other day, that those type of initiatives don't really involve the sponsors, right? So I just wanted to have, I guess, your all's opinion about that. Maybe, I don't know, Ralph, if you're still on the line, maybe I'll start with you on that. Do you have any thoughts on about that? Can you hear me?
Yes. Honestly, every time I hear about divergence, missing alignment, harmonization, all these buzzwords, I ask myself what is exactly meant, and I would ask back. So what are you exactly referring to where there should be a misalignment? I'm not saying that all is smooth, all is working fine. We have had different opinions, like we have different scientific opinions, different opinions of key opinion leaders, and so on, in certain areas also outside of neonatology. But I would challenge honestly, this approach, because when it comes down to it, my personal experience and also that of my colleagues is that there is actually quite an alignment on the principles. Obviously, there might be different, values with respect to biomarkers, but we are speaking here in a field where we don't know, at such a level where we don't even know about the best biomarker, so at all. So I would therefore always push back here and then ask, what exactly do you mean by misalignment?
Do our FDA colleagues want to talk about that? Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
Sure. Yeah, I understand the question.
Yes.
I will say I can just speak from the pediatric cluster perspective, which is a regulator-only form, but and it's intended to be that. So it's not intended to necessarily bring in the sponsor. That could be a different aspect of harmonization, and I agree that that's important as well. But I do want to talk about the value of having a regulators-only form, because in those meetings, we are talking through in great detail development issues that are being faced across regions and trying to find areas for alignment and harmonization, but also understanding where we don't agree. And sometimes even when we don't agree, I have noticed over time after attending all of these calls over the many years, is that we move closer to agreement, of course, as we gain more experience. And so one of the major benefits of a regulator-only form where we can talk candidly underneath the framework of a confidentiality agreement is that as information is gained in one region, others get access to that information and can then update their thinking or change their perspective or paradigm around that space. And it happens in many directions. So FDA to EMA to PMDA and Health Canada, Australia, and Swissmedic are all on the pediatric cluster. So one of the key features of the cluster is the information sharing. The next piece is, as Ralph pointed out, major principles for pediatric product development. We've had some very robust discussions. Extrapolation is one of them. And we've been able to really very clearly see where we are in alignment. And some of the things that then stem out of those discussions are things like the ICH documents that are able to be developed, or joint workshops that we're able to hold because we're able to move forward in certain areas, or joint white papers or other types of documents. And so it has its intention, which is to be, again, a closed session for regulators. I do think then ICH is another complementary aspect of harmonization. And then I'd be interested if anyone wants to talk about then where industry falls within that. But again, the cluster has its own primary focus.
Yep. Lynn, go ahead.
So I'm going to say this, and it is absolutely my personal opinion.
Yeah.
This is, absolutely not the official position of the FDA. I will probably deny that I said it if you said that I said this. No, but in all seriousness, I have come to acknowledge, given Ralph's statements and Diana's statements, that there is a need sometimes to just get everybody in the same room. And it's not because FDA is giving different advice or EMA said this, but FDA said that. Sometimes it's just in the way that we've provided the responses that are unclear enough that you just want to see clarity, or that it can go from that to like a real perceived difference that you have understood from the comments that we have both individually or from PMD, wherever, where regulatory authorities have given advice to you. And so I do see the potential utility in having a meeting in which we just all get in the same room for an hour and just make sure that we understand in probably a non-binding way that this is where we agree and this is maybe where we don't agree. Now, there isn't such a formal process for this, but that doesn't mean that necessarily informally you could not ask, for example, for someone from FDA to join a meeting that was occurring that you had scheduled with EMA, or certainly vice versa. Or there isn't necessarily a problem with, you meaning, I guess, industry really, proposing that such a meeting could be included, in the next PDUFA negotiations, for example. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that you do that, be clear that I'm not suggesting you do that. But I will just say that I understand that there is this one very specific avenue of communication that neither does, FDA talking to EMA or clusters or, ICH guidances necessarily hit exactly. And so there may be a need to work on, trying to develop such a process.
Sounds good. Yeah, do you have comments?
Yeah.
So,
Should I make a mic?
yeah, she's gonna send a comment.
Let's see if I can do that. Yeah. Further to Lynn's comments, you alluded to communication. You mentioned before the no but, and yeah, we expect the no and the but, even that we prefer the yes. However, but when we share minutes or we share what the FDA said or the EMA said with investors in a due diligence. When they see no, because, and then there's some kind of extreme term in it, and then afterwards it's toned down, and if you do this and that, it's getting better, we lost them already. So communication is very, very important. The way something is written in minutes can be let's work together on a financing or we're out. And I don't know, I don't remember who said that before. We're not competing against another neonatology project being funded or not. There is not many of them. We're competing against oncology, cardiology, neuroscience, and all kind. No chance. We spoke to 275 venture capitalists. We raised $100 million for our project. That's a lot of money. It took years and years to do that. Other projects, were on ice for 3 years or 4 years because they couldn't be financed. We are in terms of industry-sponsored drug development on the verge of death. That's where we are. And when we here agree that there is a trend towards a positive development, which I completely agree, I hear this in these meetings too, the outside world doesn't know that. And if we as the industry communicate that to investors, obviously we're biased, nobody believes us. We hear more often than not what did the FDA say, what the EMA say, and how predictable is it that you will get a market authorization if you achieve whatever you want to achieve in your trial. And when you tell them, we believe that we will, or we need to do this and that, they still don't believe it because of the 30 years where nothing was approved. And even if things develop positively, how will they know that it will be positive?
So could I respond?
Yes.
Or actually it's a question, or maybe it's a suggestion. I don't know.
It's a question.
Well,
Yes.
so we, and I think I'm speaking for the regulatory authorities around the world, we are expressly forbidden to ask about the finances or the economics, right? We don't get into that discussion, and nor do I think we should. But who's missing from this room then?
Yeah.
Can I begin to propose an answer to that question? please?
Just one more comment. Part of the INC are some major pharmaceutical companies. I don't see many of them present here, but they are also the investors. It's not only the finance community, the venture capital community, it's big pharma. They do not show up here. It's the very few that are actually already invested in neonatology. But the big pharma companies, I think AstraZeneca accepted, they're here. They are the ones that would invest in this, but even they don't sit at the table.
And I'm not suggesting that we change INC because again, there are no other fit for purpose fora that we can use to engage. But again, what I'm hearing is that there's a piece of, the decision making that's absent from all the advances we've been making.
And I'm not suggesting that any regulator should get involved in any of the financing at all. but it's still the way we receive message and we have to translate it and how it's perceived.
But I think if I can
Yeah, go ahead,
start
Klaus.
proposing
Yeah.
an answer to that question, that's why we're here. And that's why we're going to be here 2.5 days starting tomorrow. Because you're going to get a unique audience from Big Pharma hearing the first day of the whole meeting tomorrow starts with, guess what? Neonates and peds. So that's the first day of the whole meeting is going to be focused on rare diseases, pediatrics, young people affected, technologies that need to be introduced in very young stages of life that you will see the benefit only years later. That's the whole point about the neutral forum that we provide. We are more than happy, and that would not break our neutrality, to be a conduit to communicate exactly the message that you're proposing that we communicate. This is exactly what happened in Alzheimer's disease. This is exactly what 10 years ago, everybody was saying, and you remember one big company said, we're shutting down everything neuroscience. Now they bought a company just to get back in the game after others stuck it out and we stuck it out. And now there's a ton of activity there. Tuberculosis, polycystic kidney disease, type 1 diabetes prevention, Friedreich's ataxia. Because 30 years of nothing. Well, they've had all years of nothing until 2 years ago. And so that's the kind of thing that I want to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity to connect the dots with everyone that is attending the meeting. That's number one. And then number two, the notion of the clarity in the communication, Lynn, I would endorse that 1,000%. And we would be also more than happy to provide in a neutral, safe space the examples of when that has been successfully dosed for clarity across many other areas. And then we're more than happy to give any agency the information so that the agencies can contextualize that for the case of neonatal drug development. We'd be more than happy to do that.
Any other comments, questions from the audience?
Ed.
We just have a couple minutes. Yeah.
First off, Lynn, you really missed your career in comedy. I'm just saying. This whole
Actually, I really wanted to be a talk show host, so.
Hey, it all comes out now. I just want to comment real quick. Remember that you have parents here and they represent parent organizations, and we're in this fight with you. Use us. That's why we're here, patiently waiting. You need help with drug development, recruitment for your clinical trial? Reach out. We know these patients. We know these families. So please remember that. You're not in this alone. And by the way, a bunch of us are going to be talking at the FDA meeting on the 15th. That would be Betsy, myself, Kanwaljit,
Somebody from NIH too.
NIH.
Yeah.
Oh, Dr. Schmidt.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm virtual. I'm preparing to move. So no, it has to be virtual. Okay. So yes, this is happening. We're still pushing and we're alongside you with this. You can't do it without us. Thanks.
Yeah. All righty. Yes, go ahead, Betsy. Yep.
And my big push is, interestingly enough, with patient advocacy and therapeutic development, I got a lot of wonderful advice from the rare and the epilepsy side of things. And I don't see that as much on the neonatal advocacy groups. So I think we have an obligation to train and engage to have a focus for those NICU advocacy groups to understand the importance of digging in and understanding therapeutic development and the role that they have, because we don't have that as much at all, obviously, neonatology, but we do have that significantly in pediatric, right, and rare.
So yeah, it's going to be a topic of discussion for tomorrow's session also, Betsy, the contrast of comparing neonatal with what.
See, I just teed it up for you.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I think any other thoughts, comments, questions, feedback, anything at all? If not, yes, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
One more comment on the endpoints we discussed before. Coming from oncology, I learned in 20 years of drug development there that we should keep it simple because it's complex enough. And I feel when I heard today about the composite endpoints and several endpoints, there's no way any of the drugs in development can solve all of this. So I think we should try to prove a concept, to prove that the drug can safely improve one of the parameters or two of the parameters, and then take it from there in further development, as opposed to the other way around, try to kill a drug by trying to show too much. That's a real concern that I have from a number of discussions with stakeholders.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just
Yes, please do.
further connecting the dots on that one, because I agree with you 10 million%. So, but there's an important lesson to be learned. We've covered 30 plus drug development areas. I have not heard a single one of those areas where the question of, oh, maybe the answer to everything is a composite. Every 34 times I've heard that. I've also heard 34 times the solution to our problems is a surrogate. 34 times. I can tell you that the one place I was having this conversation with Lynn, the one place where a composite was the only possible solution was kidney transplantation. And when I said that to Lynn, she said, oh, but that's very much like oncology. Bingo, exactly. There was a very specific unmet need that could only be solved by a composite. In 33 other areas, the answers were somewhere else. And keeping it simple is absolutely key. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't look at multiple components of a potential composite altogether longitudinally. You absolutely need to do that and figuring out the source of variability. But yes, you're absolutely spot on.
And I'll just extend the comments to say part of the reason we've even talked about composite is all those disease processes may have common pathways, inflammation, oxidation, things of that nature. So that's why I think people have thought about them. I don't disagree with you that trying to find the biggest signal and get those early wins allows you to do that. But I'm also encouraged because so many of you are developing drugs for things like BPD or HIE that are very multifactorial. And it may well be that it will be like oncology, that we'll have to use drugs, multiple drugs that approach different mechanisms of action, and we may need to do that simultaneously. Maybe it'll be hypothermia with an antioxidant or something along those lines that will end up being the most effective. So, keep the faith and keep going, because I think we really have made a lot of progress.
Okay, so we just have time for one comment because, yeah.
Yeah, this is a short comment about composite endpoints. So having worked in the cardiometabolic renal space, I can tell you that so you're talking about longitudinal events, almost every one of them is a composite. Heart failure, it's heart failure, admissions to hospital plus death, or MACE or something else like that. So there are therapeutic areas where composite endpoints actually make it or break it. If you're studying thousands of patients to say small delta, and you need to include composite endpoints. So again, it just depends on the therapeutic area and what you're attempting to demonstrate.
Yeah. So you had closing comments, Klaus.
I did.
I think you said
Hey.
you had one last comment.
Well, okay. All right. So first of all, 10 years of ink. I remember the first couple meetings with Susie back in the day, 10 years ago, and with John, and the fact that I was reminded constantly that I should have gotten into pediatrics instead of internal medicine. So it's really great to see the progress we've made. I mean, we've moved the needle in a significant fashion. We still have a long way to go, but the fact that other areas are coming to the neonatal space to say, how did you integrate all those electronic health records that successfully? Can we learn that? Can we learn how you actually have so much real-time information on patients? I can tell you, the Parkinson's community sees what the neonatal community has in terms of close to real-time data, and they go, how could we ever learn how to do that? So that is a major, major amount of putting neonates front and center, not just for the benefit of neonates, but for the benefit of other areas. In that flip of not waiting for the adults to do stuff and then the ped stuff to happen, and then eventually, maybe in a blue moon, the neonate stuff to happen, this is flipping that switch. And that's one of the most important things that this group needs to be proud of what has been accomplished. And we will continue, we will not falter, and we will continue to connect the dots and make sure that we answer the right questions that will decrease uncertainty so that we can have conversations with funders to say, look at these other guys might sound more attractive, but here we have a handle on uncertainty. We can actually quantify the level of uncertainty, and we can tell you why this level of uncertainty is okay. That's where we want to get to, and that's where we will get to all together. So great meeting. Thanks, everyone, and looking forward to the rest of the conference.
Yep. Thank you. So as Claus said, we have 2.5 days more of the CPATH conference tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and the day after that. I hope many of you would stay and attend that as well. It's going to be very informative. So again, thank you everybody who traveled here. I really appreciate it. Honored to see you all over again. And we're going to do it again next year, definitely. Thank you.